16-year-old Zelma thought it was just a simple picnic. Her stepmother had smiled sweetly that morning, packed a small basket, and said, "Let's have a girls' day in the beautiful Mbol forest." Zelma, always kind and trusting, followed without a second thought. She didn't know jealousy burned deep in her stepmother's heart, jealousy of her beauty, her grace, and the way people loved her. Deep in the forest, far from any road or village, her stepmother stopped walking. She handed Zelma a half-empty bottle of water, looked her in the eyes, and whispered a cruel lie, "Your father doesn't want you anymore. He said you're a burden. I'm just doing what he asked." Before Zelma could speak, her stepmother turned and walked away, faster and faster, until she was gone. The trees swallowed her footsteps. Zelma called out, screamed, cried, but the forest stayed silent. She was alone. Just a girl with nothing but a water bottle, no food, no map, and a heart full of confusion and pain. Her legs shook. Her throat was dry. She kept hoping this was a bad dream. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of something far worse, or maybe, something greater than she could imagine. One quiet evening, after everyone in the house had eaten and gone to their rooms, Namboka stayed in the kitchen a little longer to finish her work. As always, she kept a folded piece of paper in her pocket. It was a story she had written the night before, one that had come to her in a dream. She had written it on the back of an old grocery list with a pen that barely worked. Her heart was in every word, but she had no place to keep it safe. Later, when she swept the floor and emptied the trash bin, the paper slipped from her pocket without her noticing. It landed quietly among food wrappers and torn plastic bags. The next morning, Aiken, the employer's teenage daughter, was looking through the trash for a craft project. Her hand stopped when she saw the crumpled paper. Curious, she opened it and began to read. At first, she didn't think much of it. But as her eyes moved from one line to the next, she became completely still. The story was about a girl who felt invisible, who worked all day but was never seen, yet still dreamed of being a writer. Aiken read it twice. Her heart felt heavy, and her throat was tight. She had never read anything so honest, so raw. She didn't laugh. She didn't mock. Instead, she took a photo of the story and typed out the words into a storytelling website she followed. She didn't even tell her parents. She used the name Silent Soul and pressed publish. By the time she woke up the next day, something unbelievable had happened. The story had spread like fire. Thousands of people had read it. Hundreds had left comments. Some said they cried. Others said they felt like someone had finally put their own pain into words. There were shares on social media, messages from people in different countries, and people writing things like, "This story feels like a hug I didn't know I needed." Aiken scrolled through the comments again and again, her hands shaking. And then she saw one comment that made her eyes fill with tears. It said, "I'd buy you 100 coffees if I could. You saved my life." That one comment was shared more than any other. People made art out of it. They made quotes and videos with soft music in the background, reading lines from the story aloud. Aiken sat in her room, phone in her hand, not knowing what to do. She wanted to tell Namboka right away, but she was scared her parents would be angry, or that Namboka might get in trouble. Still, deep down, she felt proud. She had helped something special reach the world. She had helped give a voice to someone who never had one. She didn't know how or when to tell Namboka the truth. But what she did know was this: the world had finally heard the quiet maid's voice. And they didn't just listen. They felt every word. The sun had just started rising when Zelma opened her eyes. She was still under the fallen tree, cold, hungry, and weak. Her body was covered in scratches, and her bare feet were sore and swollen. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and her lips were dry and cracked. She didn't even have the strength to cry anymore. The forest around her was quiet, almost too quiet. She sat up slowly and leaned against the tree, trying to stay awake. Every part of her body hurt. She didn't know what day it was or how far she was from home. She only knew one thing: she was completely alone. Then, suddenly, the ground started to shake. A loud roaring sound filled the forest. Birds flew out of the trees, and small animals ran for cover. Zelma looked up, her eyes wide with fear. Something big was coming. Was it a storm? Was the earth breaking apart? She pulled herself closer to the tree and held her breath. That's when she saw it, a huge helicopter flying low over the forest. The noise was deafening. It looked like it was having trouble. Smoke trailed behind it. A few seconds later, it came down hard, landing in a small clearing nearby. It didn't explode, but it hit the ground with a loud crash. Zelma covered her ears and stayed hidden. From the helicopter, soldiers rushed out, shouting and checking the area. They were strong, serious, and fully armed. Zelma was afraid to move. She thought maybe they were hunting something. But then a man stepped out of the helicopter, and everything changed. He didn't wear a soldier's uniform. He wore a clean white shirt and had a calm but strong face. He looked around carefully, taking in the forest and the situation. This was not just any man, it was President Obesai Tamba, the leader of the country. He was supposed to be flying to a meeting in the city, but engine failure had forced him to land in this wild part of Mbol forest. As he stepped through the trees, something caught his eye. A small figure, crouched under a fallen tree. Bruised, dirty, and barefoot. Obesai froze. Zelma looked back at him, scared and confused. For a moment, neither of them said a word. Then he walked slowly toward her, holding up his hand in peace. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now." Zelma didn't answer, but her eyes filled with tears. She had been lost, forgotten, abandoned, and now, out of nowhere, the most powerful man in the country was speaking to her with kindness. The soldiers helped her out gently. One gave her water. Another offered a blanket. President Obesai watched her closely, already thinking about what she had been through. Without asking too many questions, he said, "She's coming with us." Just like that, Zelma was no longer a lost girl in the forest. She was now in the care of the president. As the helicopter rose again, she sat inside, wrapped in a blanket, holding hope for the first time in days. The helicopter rose slowly above the forest, lifting Zelma away from the place where she thought she would die. She sat wrapped in a warm blanket, her feet tucked under her, still shaking from cold and fear. But something inside her had shifted. For the first time in days, she felt a little safe. Right next to her sat President Obesai Tamba, the most powerful man in the country. He had given her the seat usually meant for top diplomats and important leaders. But today, it belonged to a bruised, barefoot girl from the forest. Zelma didn't know why he cared. She didn't know why he looked at her with such kindness. But she felt it, and that was enough to make her heart ache. Obesai didn't rush her. He didn't ask 100 questions. He simply looked at her with gentle eyes and said softly, "Who did this to you?" That one question opened the door inside her. Zelma looked down at her scratched hands, at her torn dress, and then at him. Her voice was quiet at first, shaky, unsure. But once she started, she couldn't stop. She told him everything, how her stepmother had always hated her, how she was treated like a burden, how she had to do all the housework, eat last, sleep on the floor. How she had once believed her stepmother would change, would love her. But she never did. Zelma's voice grew stronger as she spoke, her words full of pain and memories. She told him about the day her stepmother had tricked her with a fake picnic. How they had walked deep into the Mbol forest. How she was left there with just a half-empty water bottle and a lie, that her father no longer wanted her. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't stop talking. She told him how she wandered the forest, hungry and scared, chased by wild dogs and scratched by thorns. How she slept under a fallen tree and prayed to a mother she had never met. And then, how the stars watched over her until morning. President Obasai listened to every word. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look away. He listened with his whole heart. His face was serious, but his eyes were full of emotion. He had seen many things in his life, war, power, politics, but something about Zelma's story touched him deeply. She was just a child, yet she had survived something most adults couldn't. She had strength. She had courage. And she had something even rarer, hope. When she finished, there was a long silence. The only sound was the low hum of the helicopter. Then Obasai reached out gently and took her hand. "You are not alone anymore," he said. "I promise you that." Zelma didn't know what her future would be. She didn't know where they were going or what would happen next. But in that moment, sitting beside a man who truly listened, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, worth. She wasn't just a lost girl in the forest anymore. She was seen. She was heard. And her story had just begun. The helicopter landed on a clean, wide lawn surrounded by guards and shining cars. Zelma stared through the window, her eyes wide. She had never seen anything like this before. Everything looked so big, so beautiful, and so bright. As the doors opened, warm air touched her face, and gentle hands helped her down. She was still weak, still wearing the same torn dress from the forest, her feet dirty and bruised. But no one laughed at her. No one looked away. Everyone treated her like someone important. Inside the palace, nurses rushed to care for her. They washed her wounds, gave her soft clean clothes, and warm food that smelled like heaven. Zelma ate slowly, almost afraid the food would disappear. Her bed was soft, with white sheets and pillows she had only dreamed of. She didn't have to sleep on the cold floor anymore. She didn't have to worry about being left alone in the dark forest. Here, she was safe. Here, people smiled at her and called her dear and sweet child. It felt like a dream. But it was real. The next day, her face was everywhere, on TV screens, in newspapers, on social media. Reporters shared her story, the girl found in the forest. People across the country wanted to know who she was, what had happened to her, and why the president himself had brought her home. Many cried after hearing her story. Some were angry. Others inspired. But one thing was clear, everyone cared. President Obasai stood before the cameras and gently placed his hand on Zelma's shoulder. He looked serious but proud. "This is Zelma," he said. "She is now under my care. She has suffered, but she has survived. And she deserves love, safety, and a future." He didn't call her a guest. He didn't call her a visitor. He called her his ward, someone he would protect like family. People were shocked. Obasai had been a widower for years. He had no children of his own, and many believed he would never open his heart again. But now, he had made space for this young girl who came from nothing but pain. And the nation saw something beautiful in that. They didn't just see a president and a lost girl. They saw a father and a daughter. Zelma stood beside him quietly, holding his hand. She wasn't used to cameras or big crowds, but she held her head up. She remembered where she came from, the forest, the fear, the cold nights. And now she was standing in the palace, wearing clean shoes, soft clothes, and a small necklace gifted by Obasai's late wife. She could feel that the whole country was watching, not with judgment, but with love. And so, the girl who had once been forgotten was now remembered by millions. She didn't have to fight alone anymore. She didn't have to cry in the dark. Because now, she had a home, a voice, and someone who believed in her. Zelma's new life had only just begun, and the world was ready to follow her journey. In a small, quiet house far from the capital, Zelma's stepmother sat watching TV with a bored look on her face. She was sipping her tea when something made her freeze. Her eyes widened. Her hand began to shake. There, on the screen, standing proudly next to President Obasai, was Zelma. Clean. Dressed in beautiful clothes. Alive. Her name was on the news. Her story was being told. The girl she had left to die in the forest had survived, and not only survived, but become known across the entire country. The stepmother's mouth dropped open in shock. She dropped her cup, and it smashed on the floor. No, this can't be, she whispered to herself. Without thinking, she grabbed her handbag and rushed out of the house. She jumped into a taxi, yelling for the driver to take her to the presidential palace. Her heart pounded as the car raced through the streets. She couldn't lose control now. Not after everything. She needed to stop this before Zelma said too much. When she arrived at the gates of the palace, she jumped out and ran to the entrance. "Let me in," she shouted. "That's my daughter. I need to speak with her." But the guards didn't move. One of them stepped forward and said calmly, "You can't go inside. The president has already ordered an investigation. Step back, madam." Her face went pale. "Investigation," she repeated softly, almost to herself. She realized it was already too late. Inside, things were happening fast. President Obasai had not wasted a second after hearing Zelma's story. He ordered a full investigation into her past. His team of experts searched through documents, legal records, and school files. And the truth began to come out piece by piece. Zelma had been the rightful heir to land and money left by her late mother. But someone had stolen it, someone close. Signatures had been forged. Property papers had been changed. The person behind it all was her stepmother. It didn't stop there. Neighbors who had stayed quiet for years began to speak. They told stories of a little girl who never smiled, who was always doing chores while the other children played. Teachers remembered Zelma coming to school with torn shoes and bruises she couldn't explain. People now had the courage to talk, because the president was listening. And the nation was watching. The news exploded across TV, radios, and social media. Zelma's truth shocks the nation, stepmother accused of years of abuse, justice for the girl from the forest. The country that once didn't know Zelma now stood behind her. The stepmother was arrested within days. She had no words left, no lies strong enough to save her. She watched from a jail cell as Zelma's name became a symbol of courage. The same girl she tried to erase was now shining brighter than ever. And Zelma? She didn't need revenge. She had truth. And that truth gave her the power to rise above it all. Zelma's life changed faster than anyone could have imagined. One week she was sleeping under a fallen tree in the middle of the forest, and now, she was stepping into the gates of the most respected academy in all of Africa. It was a beautiful campus with tall buildings, green gardens, and students from all over the continent. But none of them had a story like Zelma's. She was not just any girl. She was the one the whole country had watched rise from pain to power. And now, she was walking through those school gates under full state sponsorship, with the blessing of the president himself. President Obasai didn't just call her a student. He called her the daughter of Congo. Those words made headlines. People printed them on posters, painted them on walls, and shared them online with love and pride. The girl who had once been forgotten was now becoming a symbol of hope for thousands. The president believed in her, and so did the nation. Zelma didn't waste her second chance. She studied hard, asked questions, stayed late after classes, and listened to every lesson like her future depended on it, because it did. But more than books and tests, Zelma carried something deeper inside her, a mission. She couldn't forget where she came from. She couldn't forget the fear, the cold nights, the hunger, and the silence. She knew there were other girls out there, still trapped in those same dark places she had escaped from. And she couldn't leave them behind. So, even while studying, she started to work on something bigger. With help from mentors, teachers, and the president's team, she created her own foundation. Its goal was simple but powerful: to rescue, support, and protect abandoned and abused girls across the country. They called it, From Roots to Rise. The name came from her story, a girl left at the roots of a tree who rose to stand strong. She traveled to schools and villages, speaking to young girls with soft but strong words. "You are not forgotten," she told them. "If I can survive, so can you. And you don't have to do it alone anymore." Her voice reached places the government couldn't. Her face became a light in dark corners. Girls who had never spoken out before were now writing letters, asking for help, asking for hope. And Zelma was ready for all of them. She became more than a survivor. She became a leader. Newspapers called her a young visionary. Women called her brave. And the people? They called her theirs. One day, while giving a speech, President Obasanjo looked at the crowd and said something that gave everyone chills. He pointed to her and declared, "You took her to the forest to break her. Now watch her build a nation." And they did. Everyone watched as Zelma kept rising, stone by stone, girl by girl, future by future. She was no longer just the girl in the forest. She was the girl building something far greater than revenge. She was building a legacy. Exactly 1 year after she was left to die in the forest, Zelma returned, but this time, everything was different. She was not barefoot. She was not crying. She was not alone. She stepped out of a black car dressed in white, glowing with confidence. Behind her was a full team, camera crews, reporters, and security. And beside her stood the man who had changed her life forever, President Obasanjo. The forest was still wild and green, but today it felt like a place of victory, not fear. They walked to the exact spot where she had once hidden under a fallen tree, cold and scared. Zelma stood still for a moment, looking around quietly. The memory was still in her heart, but she was not that girl anymore. She had risen. The cameras rolled as a statue was unveiled. It showed a young girl standing tall, barefoot, one hand reaching toward the sky. On the stone below, it read, "From the ground to glory." People watching cried. Across the country, TVs showed the moment live. Girls who once felt invisible now felt seen. And in a small, cold jail cell, her stepmother sat in silence, forced to watch it all. The girl she tried to bury had become a symbol of power, hope, and change.